I'm Victoria Meredith. In this session, we'll look at a few practical guidelines that you might want to keep in mind when selecting new music for your adult choir. We usually benefit from considering three things when selecting repertoire. Number one is quality and appeal. This is of the piece overall. Number two, musical characteristics. And number three, vocal demands. So if you look at those three things when you're looking at repertoire, you're going to have a pretty good idea whether a piece is going to work in your situation or not. So what I mean by the quality and the appeal of a piece is I like to aim for music that is accessible, not necessarily terribly difficult, but of high quality. Research tells us that adult musicians are to a large extent motivated by the intrinsic qualities of the music itself. So if the music is really good, that's huge motivation to the singers. Now, quality has nothing to do with difficulty. A piece can be musically straightforward and at the same time well-constructed and of high quality. It can also be overly complex and demand more rehearsal time than most groups have to devote to it. Harder is not necessarily better. When I talk about appeal, I'm really talking primarily about you as the conductor. I have to like a piece to want to spend a lot of time rehearsing it. There has to be something about it that I like, and I want to do it, and I want to share it with the singers and with the listeners. So be sure that you like it to start with. If you do, then you're more likely to enjoy rehearsing it, your singers will enjoy it more, and in turn the listeners will relate to it more. And this all begins with your own musical intuition. It's not a checklist. It doesn't have this, 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 and this. It's much more vague than that, but we know it, it's like you know it when you see it. So follow your musical intuition and trust it. So we move then to musical characteristics. This has to do with the compositional aspects of the piece. How is it put together? How is it written? So I find, yes, it's really helpful to play through the whole piece, to read it at the piano and play it. But I find I learn a lot more if after I've done that, I actually sing through each of the parts, and not just the melody. I actually sing through the alto part, sing through the tenor part, sing through the bass part. Because that's where you find the challenges. That's where you find, oh, this is going to take a lot of time because that's really, really tricky there, and what the relationships are between the parts too. You find out much more about the music and whether it's going to work for your group by doing that, for example, than just listening to a wonderful choir sing a polished performance of it, which is just, oh, that's great, I want to do that. But then you have to figure out how did you get there, and do you have time to do that? Can your group do that? So it's great to listen to it as well, but really helpful to get to know the music yourself first. And the kinds of things that I look for when I'm singing through all of the parts, I look for rhythmic aspects, where the music and the different parts are all moving together rhythmically, or you have paired voicing, or easy to hear polyphonic entries. Those things are most easily learned. Music that is both rhythmic and homophonic is generally easily learned much more quickly than complicated rhythmic independence in each part, or very, very slow moving sustained chords. Those are so hard to keep in tune so much of the time, and to keep right together. So know that the more complicated the rhythmic writing is, the longer it will probably take to learn the music. Then I always look at the accompaniment. Accompanied pieces in which the accompaniment supports and includes at least some of the voice parts is most easily learned and performed. But this doesn't mean that the accompaniment always needs to be doubling the voices. But it is helpful if it's supporting the voices and not necessarily fighting with them. Then if you look at the part writing, which you easily do when you sing through the parts, it's pretty obvious that stepwise conjunct movement voice writing is more accessible than music with a lot of large leaps, especially when you have more than one leap in the same direction in a row. And when you sing through this, you find these kind of potential challenges and decide whether it's really practical for you to do. Now, just a word about tempo. Tempos that range from fairly slow to fairly fast, not just medium all the time, but a slowish one, a fastish one, are usually the easiest to sustain, as opposed to very, very slow, which is hard to keep in tune, or very, very fast, which can be really hard with fast diction and precision of pitch. So again, it depends on what the strengths of your choir are and how much time you have to work things. So sometimes things that are a little bit not on the outsides of the slowest and fastest are more practical. Then I always like to look for the vocal demands, what vocal technique is required to sing this piece well. First thing I always look for are the ranges. And just to make it easy to kind of identify if this is a healthy range for each part, just a general guideline is to look for what octave contains most of the notes of the part. So if, say you're looking at the alto part, for me I would look for most of the notes of their part to fall between A below, middle C, and A above. A for alto, A to A. And since the men's voices are approximately an octave below the women's voices, the basses I would look for A to A as well, an octave lower. So they're basically on the staff for the men. Then for the sopranos, I look a fifth up, E to E. Tenors, same thing, E to E. E above middle C, E below middle C. Now, this is just a small part of their range because each one of these parts can easily sing at least a third higher and a third lower, and many of them considerably more. But when you're looking for the tessitura, where they're going to be most comfortable, have the best sound, these are pretty practical. And it also tells you if it's, well, actually, it does kind of go E to E, but most of the time it sits up kind of E, F, G, and way up there. So you're kind of staying in the very highest part. That's okay for some, not so okay for others. So if it's within the octave, it's pretty comfortable for everybody that sings that part. So just a guideline, a general thing to look at. And then dynamics. They can be tricky with an amateur choir. I try sometimes, not always, but to minimize forte singing and also to avoid really soft dynamics in the upper range, because people tend to get really tight when they try to get soft on the high notes. And I don't want that. I just want them to have their best sound all the time, regardless of what it's marked. And I don't want them forcing, if it's really, really loud all the time, I don't want them pushing. So I'd like their very best loud sound, and we'll take that, whatever it is. And even if that's a mezzo forte, that's going to be your forte, because it's your best, most beautiful, loud sound. So you have to find a balance between what's the demand of the music, but also what can they do well vocally and still sing beautifully. So if you consider the quality and the appeal of the piece, and that I should mention too that also includes relating to the text. That's always the first thing that I do start with, is looking at the text. If you consider the quality and the appeal, the musical challenges and the vocal demands of each part in the music that you're looking at for your choir, you'll most likely find that your selections are consistently enjoyed by the singers and the listener, and also very successful. Thank you.